Hi, and welcome to the second episode of Lockdown, Light at the End of the Tunnel. This one focusing on HR, business, and health and safety. I have one returning guest this week, which I'm very excited for. It's Jay Bharani. She was very popular in last week's webinar, so we have her back, along with two specialists from her firm. Just to introduce myself, I'm Heather Anson, and I'm Managing Director of Anson Evaluate, and we're running these webinars as a chance to reach out to our clients and to the community in general, the business community in general, to give them the tools and the tips to help them survive and hopefully thrive on the other side of this. Now, if you've attended one of these webinars before, you'll know this, but I will let everyone else know. We can't hear you. You can't ask us questions verbally, but you can ask questions of the panel throughout this 1 hour webinar by typing the question into the question section. And I will be taking those questions, and then if we have time, we will get to all of them. If not, we will be trying to answer them after the webinar. So if you have a question that hasn't been answered, don't worry about it. We will try and get in touch and make sure you have a quick answer to that if we haven't been able to cover it. So you can do that. Also, we have the slides that are going to be presented today are available to you as a handout. Some of them have quite detailed information on them, and we don't want you to have to write that all down while you're listening to it. So you can download those handouts directly from this webinar as well, and have those available for you. Now, I believe we are ready to get started, and we're going to start with the woman herself, Jay Bharani with Bharani HR.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for asking me to come back on. As you know, we've been really busy with HR and employment law matters during the coronavirus pandemic. So it's good to be able to help where we can. So just as by way of introduction, I'm Jay. I'm a solicitor, employment solicitor, and Managing Director of Bharani HR and Employment Law. So we help lots and lots of businesses across the country, including lots of law firms, to manage their employee issues. And two of my colleagues, as Heather mentioned, are going to be contributing today. So first of all, with my next slide, these are some of the things that you need to think about. And we did go through these things last week, for those of you that joined us last week, in some detail, which I'm not going to do this time. But I think that all businesses need to be thinking about workforce planning right now, and then some of these other issues. And what I've done is I've picked out a number of questions that I thought were the most common questions that we've had. So for the first question that we've got, I'll just run you through. First of all, one of the common questions has been, can I force my employee to return to the office or the workplace? Now, my colleague Jason is going to talk in more detail about the government guidance around this. But one of the things that have come up is Section 44 and 100 of the Employment Rights Act, and protection for the employee against detriment and dismissal where they feel that they're in serious and imminent danger. So considering that in light of COVID-19, first of all, the employee's belief that they're in danger has to be both genuine and reasonable. And it could be a way for them to refuse to return to the workplace. And lots of businesses are really wanting to get their employees back into the workplace for at least some of the time. So the sorts of steps that you need to follow are, first of all, following the government guidance on safe working on a safe working place. So the government's issued quite comprehensive guidance split into 8 different sectors. And the sector that most of you, I imagine, on this webinar will be looking at is the office and contact centres. And everything starts with your risk assessment. So Jason's going to tell you a bit more about that. But I suppose the guidance at the moment tells us that wherever we can work from home, we need to carry on doing that. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, now that lots of businesses have invested in home working. So if you can work from home, that's what you need to be doing. With my own firm, I'm happy to share with you my justification for having a rota and having some staff coming into the office from the beginning of last week. So we started off with 1 day a week in the office on a rotation, and we're now going to move up to 2 days a week from next week. When I was trying to justify why I felt that we should do that, some of the things that I wrote down were things like that you can't effectively do at home. So we have to deal with filing and printing. We have to deal with things like opening files and closing files and invoicing, and really importantly, things like supervision and collaboration with colleagues, which we're finding that even though we can process our work remotely, it is different. When you're trying to collaborate and see where you are on top of work, particularly those people working in teams, I think that it's reasonable to say that some of that time needs to be in the office. And also, you've got to balance the risk of getting the virus with the need for social interaction and people's mental well-being. And for many people, it's very beneficial to be able to get into some sort of routine, come into the office and make sure that they're seeing other people. Of course, if they're experiencing any symptoms or if they don't want to do that, then they could argue that they haven't got a safe working environment. So you've got to make sure that you've taken all the steps that the government are advising to alleviate those fears. And then the last thing to say on that is if somebody's got an irrational fear, or you as the employer feel that there's an irrational fear and that it's not justified because you've taken all the steps you need to take, then you can consider putting them on unpaid leave. So if you've got the work for them, but they're refusing to come in and you've taken all the correct steps, look at unpaid leave. And as a last resort, possibly disciplinary action. But you do need to be mindful of mental health issues. And Catherine is going to talk to you a little bit more about spotting those signs and what you do about that. Okay, so my next question that we've been asked is about redundancies. So can we make staff redundant during the furlough period? Now, the furlough scheme was designed to save jobs. That's why the government has ploughed a lot into the scheme and now extended it to the end of October. But actually what we're seeing on the ground is that more and more businesses are looking at redundancies, unfortunately. And I think that the usual redundancy rules apply. So just go back to basics, justify why you need to make redundancies. Consider your business plan, where you are now as a business and where you think you will be over the next few months. And do the usual steps, so things like consultation, looking at alternatives to redundancy, looking at selection and pooling, and don't forget collective consultation where you've got a larger number of redundancies. You ought to take advice if you're looking at redundancies, because what we're finding is that employees are already saying that they're going to look at unfair dismissal claims, and they're trickling through now where people haven't followed the correct procedure. So get some advice. Just a note on redundancy payments. So you can't recover the redundancy payment if your member of staff has been with you for 2 years or more. They'll be entitled to a payment. You can't cover that on the furlough grant, but you can recover the notice. So if you give them notice during the furlough period, you can claim 80%, subject to the cap of £2,500. But you need to top up. If you're only paying 80%, you need to top that notice period up to 100%. If you make a payment in lieu of notice, just bear in mind that that's not going to be covered under the furlough grant, because where you make a payment in lieu, you're terminating employment straight away. So tactically, it's better to, from cost-saving point, to issue the notice during the furlough period. Okay, so the next question that I've been asked is, can we change terms and conditions when staff return to work? So lots of businesses are getting ready to return to work, but they feel that the capacity will be reduced. They are going to need to change terms and conditions, whether that's reducing pay or hours or both. So the starting point with changing terms and conditions is trying to get consent. from your employees. If employees agree to a change, then you need to deal with the paperwork relating to that. So, you know, have a properly recorded paper trail to show that they've agreed to the change, and a varied contract. If there isn't agreement, then you need to think about whether you can make a unilateral change. And it's not always easy to do that, but it's possible. And you have to go through a meaningful consultation. If it's a serious and significant change to terms, like pay and hours, then I would say that, you know, you might need 30 days consultation. That might be deemed to be reasonable. The risks for the business is claims for breach of contract and constructive unfair dismissal. So, you know, you do need to undertake the process properly and take some advice. So on that, really, consent is always the best approach. And I think in today's climate, most employees would rather consent to some changed terms than to lose their job. And so if you can justify it as a business need and go through the consultation process, then you should be able to make some changes if necessary. Okay, so the next one we will look at. My last question really is about holidays. So this is probably our most common question that we've been asked, and that's partly because the government guidance wasn't clear to start with. So it wasn't clear whether you can insist that employees take holidays during the furlough period, or even if they're working, whether you can compel them to take holidays, so that there's no big rush at the end of the year. Now, because the furlough scheme's been extended to the end of October, I think it's completely reasonable and sensible and practical to ask employees to take holidays. And Catherine's going to talk you through some of the practical issues around that and how you do that from a HR perspective. But from a legal perspective, one of the things that I picked out in the government guidance, which I thought was really interesting, is this paragraph, and I'll read it to you. So, if an employer requires a worker to take holiday while on furlough, the employer should consider whether any restrictions the worker is under, such as the need to socially distance or self-isolate, would prevent the worker from resting, relaxing, and enjoying leisure time, which is the fundamental purpose of holiday. So I think if you've got some clued up employees, then they may well be citing that clause and saying, I don't want to take my holiday until later in the year because I'm not going to be able to enjoy that holiday. And I think that each case will turn on its own merits, and you know, you ought to take some advice and think about whether that's justified or not. But in principle, you can ask staff to take holidays. You have to give them twice as much notice as the holiday that you want them to take. So I'll give them written notice of that. And don't forget that if you are going to be claiming the furlough grant during the holiday, for the holiday period, you have to top it up to 100% if you are currently paying employees 80% of salary. Otherwise, I think it's sensible to start getting holidays out of the way. Okay, so that's all from me today, and I'll pass on to Catherine, who's going to talk you through some of the practical aspects from a HR point of view. So in our firm, we sort of split things where we have legal issues and HR, and the HR team are brilliant at working through you know the sort of nitty-gritty of how you go about doing some of these things. Catherine.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so hello, I'm Catherine. I'm the senior HR advisor within the firm, and me and the HR team, we work to sort of balance the legal requirements of dealing with staff along with making sure that you're supporting them and their well-being as well, so that from a whole business point of view, it's all tickety-boo. So if we could have the first slide, please. So holidays. So just following on from Jay's point, she's told you what the legal concept around holidays is, but you need to sort of think about the practicalities of that in terms of both deciding how much holiday to enforce and also how you're going to communicate that to the staff. We've found that it is something that we've had quite a lot of pushback from staff because obviously they're not happy about taking holiday at a time where they can't pop off to Crete. They're kind of stuck doing nothing. So they're wanting to save up their annual leave to be able to actually do something with it. So you need to be quite careful about the way you approach it so that you haven't got a lot of disgruntled staff on your hands. So from a practical point of view, before you communicate anything to your staff, what we're suggesting is you need to look at when does your holiday year run from until. Obviously, everybody has a different holiday year, because that's going to guide your hand to a degree as to how much holiday you might enforce. And you also need to sort of have a consideration as to how much you want people to have used holiday by. So I'm sure Jay won't mind you as saying, you know, we have this in place at ours with this in mind, that we have kind of cut-off dates, so we need to have used so much holiday by a certain date so that we haven't all got lots of annual leave to take at the same time. You then, excuse me, you then need to decide whether you are going to directly enforce it. By that I mean, are you going to say, right, you need to take holiday in the last 2 weeks of August, or are you going to put time periods in place for the staff? So you need to have used so much by this date, so much by this date, so much by this date. And really, you need to be looking at the amount of holiday that people have got left over, and you need to be thinking about exactly how much you want them to have at each point if you're going to do it that way. If you're going to enforce particular dates, then as Jay said, you need to make sure that you give them twice as much notice as the amount of holiday being taken. So if you want them to take 1 week, you would need to give them 2 weeks notice. Then you need to think about how you're going to communicate it. And obviously that's the tricky bit, because you need to get that balance between making sure that your business is going to be viable coming out of this tricky situation, and also making sure that you're not going to be upsetting your staff too much because you want to keep them on side. So what we're suggesting is that, you know, you don't just send them a letter saying this is happening. We're suggesting, depending on the amount of staff you've got, having a conversation with them about it to soften the blow, and giving them a real rationale for why you are doing it. And for most people, that rationale is going to be that we don't know really how long this period of uncertainty is going to carry on. And you need to make sure that at the end of it, you've got a viable business that is going to be able to employ as many people as possible. The way that you're going to employ as many people as possible is to have as much revenue as possible. And so by that token, you need to ensure that you've got enough staff there to be able to serve your customers or your clients in order to make sure that revenue is coming in. And so the reason that you're putting it in place is in actual fact to help them further down the line and to make sure that you're preserving as many jobs as possible, because your revenue is going to be high, or as high as possible. It's quite important to remember the new legislation that's come out that says that people can carry over holiday for 2 years now. We're finding that we're getting a lot of pushback when people are trying to enforce holidays, because the employees are coming back saying, well, the government says we can carry it over now, so why aren't we? It's important that you remember the distinction between time and actually going on holiday. That legislation has changed in order to ensure that people who can't take the time have the ability to use that holiday at some point. So when we're thinking about time, we're talking about people who don't have the capacity to be able to take holiday. So at the minute, that would be people like nurses, delivery drivers, who are just that pulled out at work that they can't possibly take annual leave. What that doesn't mean is the people who just can't go on holiday. So if you do get pushback from your employees around about that, you can sort of make that distinction for them. Okay, so slide 2, please. Home working. So the question that we're getting a lot is, do we need a home working policy? The short answer to that is yes, we recommend that you do. It's something that we draft for a lot of our clients. There's a few different reasons for that. On one hand, you need to think about your obligations as an employer with regard to things like health and safety. You're thinking about your workspace assessments to make sure that they're appropriately set up from a health and safety point of view. You also need to think about confidentiality issues. Have they got sort of the Wi-Fi, is that set up to be secure? Things like that. So all of these things should be set out in a policy. And it may be appropriate in actual fact for there to be some kind of workplace assessment that's done that can be remote with each of your employees to make sure that all of these considerations are taken into account. A policy would also set out expectations for staff in terms of their working day, in terms of what you expect them to be doing, or even in fact, you know, if you've got people with childcare issues, things like that, things in place in terms of letting them have more regular breaks so that they can look after their children, or if there are issues around childcare, who can they contact in order to make sure that they're not just slacking. And we also are recommending that obviously a lot of the people who are working at home at the moment, it's not usual for them, and it is maybe something that you are going to carry on after the end of this current crisis, but it might be something that you're not going to carry on. So what we're recommending is that if you're putting a home working policy in place now that's governing the current situation, if you don't feel that it's going to be something that you want to do long term, make sure that that policy is very clear about the fact that it is a short-term policy and that at the end of this current crisis it will be reviewed and that you reserve the right to change it. Okay. So the next question is employees with children. So if an employee has no childcare, can you force them to work? Well, again, the simple answer to that is yes, ultimately you can force them to work. But then the other question is, should you force them to work? When it comes to furlough, it is entirely appropriate to furlough people who have got childcare issues. It's quite clear in the government guidance that is one of the reasons in order to furlough somebody. So if somebody is having genuine issues with childcare, then you really need to consider whether you should furlough them or not. Because if you do force them to come to work, they're probably not going to be able to. So you're kind of making a bit of a rod for your own back if you don't. If you choose not to furlough them, however, you have got some options. You can either offer them unpaid leave because they're choosing not to be at work. You could offer them paid leave if you're feeling generous, but if you're going to do that, you may as well furlough them because you can claim it back. You can offer them the opportunity to use holiday in order to sort of for a bit of a stopgap for them, and it might be that they can have a reduction in their hours and mix that up with some holiday pay so that they're not using too much holiday. So they're not losing too much of their pay. You can also, which we're not recommending at the minute, consider that to be an unauthorised absence, which could lead on to a disciplinary procedure if necessary. We only really recommend that if the schools are open and they are simply choosing not to send their children to school. At the minute, as you know, schools are closed, so a lot of parents, their hands are tied. They've literally got no way to look after their kids, which is why we're not recommending to go to consider it to be unauthorised absence and go to the step of disciplinary. However, if they are just simply not wanting their kids to go to school, then that is something you need to consider. One thing that you do need to bear in mind is that if you are putting a blanket policy out of everybody needs to attend work, there could be a case for indirect sex discrimination because you're putting a PCP in place that is potentially going to leave a segment of people or at a detriment. So it is something you need to consider quite closely before you make a decision to enforce them being back at work. Okay. Now, mental health. So this is big anyway, but obviously at the moment it is it's a little bit more prevalent in terms of people discussing it. So I think what we're saying to all of our clients is that you need to remember that it's a very strange time for people at the moment. A lot of things have changed to do with work, to do with their social life, to do with their family life, and then there's the added concern about worries for not only their own health but also the health of their family and their loved ones. So what we're saying is that you need to be very aware that people might be suffering a little bit more than they usually do, but also we're finding that a lot of people are acting in ways that they wouldn't ordinarily act, in ways that are quite out of character and unusual. So before jumping to any conclusions about and deciding to go for a disciplinary or sanction them in any way for actions, we really are saying you need to consider about having a conversation about support and really get to the root of any problems before you take that decision, because people may be struggling, and when we're not face to face with each other at the moment, it's even more difficult. So a few things that you can do, we're recommending that you check in regularly, whether it's that they're home working or whether that's furloughed, either way, check in with them, because even your furloughed staff might still be struggling, and because they're not working for you anymore or currently, it doesn't mean that they're not still your responsibility to a degree. So check in with them, make sure they're all okay. And something that Jay actually always says to us quite a lot is, it's okay to not feel okay. And make sure that they realise that if they're not feeling okay, it's okay. And just to talk about it, and that there may be things that you can do as an employer that are going to help them with that. One thing about home working is we've had a lot of conversations with people that employees feel that they can't really switch off at home because they're not having that distinct stop, as in you leave the office and go home. They're working longer hours. They're almost feeling some guilt about leaving their laptop to go and have a lunch hour. Make sure that you're giving them permission to do that, because it's really important that people can switch off for those rest periods, because that's really going to help their mental health as well. There's quite a lot of external support that you can get from places like Mind, the Samaritans, who can give you a lot of really good advice to help your staff. And I think that we are going to post some links up to them for you to be able to contact. But the other two things that we would really recommend is, first of all, have a mental health policy in place, which we could help you with if you needed. And what that does is it sets out a framework, A, for the employee to know how to get support if they need it, and B, for you as the employer and your managers to know what that support looks like, and what you should be doing for your staff. We also recommend that you should have a mental health first aider. In the short term, that might be a little bit difficult to do given sort of the current climate, so it might be more of a long-term aim for you. But I mean, we run mental health first aider courses that run for 2 days. We run that alongside Mind, so that you've got somebody within your business who can give more focused support about mental health, and in the knowledge of how to sort of deal with people with mental health issues a little bit more clearly. Okay. So I'm now going to pass on to my colleague Jason, who is going to talk to you a little bit more about health and safety issues in the workplace and some top tips around that. So I shall hand to you, Jason.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I'm Jason Thelwell, business consultant at Bjarne Law. Just wanted to really sort of touch base a little bit around health and safety, a bit of an update in terms of perhaps of the new legislation, new measures, safety measures that you need to put in place because of COVID-19. And just picking up on a couple of things that Jay and Catherine had said, I've been sort of thinking along as they've been talking there. Jay talked about, can you force employees to go back into the workplace, which Jay's giving you the sort of legal answers to, but I think that needs to be backed up by, you know, ensuring that you do have risk assessments in place, because if ever there was an issue with an employee who may have left or, you know, tried in some form or way to retaliate against your decision, then, you know, if ever health and safety executive got involved, you have something in writing, you have documentary evidence to be able to say, look, you know, we have made our workplace as safe as possible. In health and safety, there's always two words that always springs to mind, which is, you know, you've done everything reasonably practicable. So long as you can tick those boxes and document that you have done the risk assessment in your workplace, then I think it kind of just backs up a little bit, you know, what Jay was saying. And from the mental health point of view as well, you know, I think health and safety these days really should be changed to mental health and safety, because, you know, as Catherine rightly said, mental health is right at the top of the agenda, more so for a lot of people at the moment. And one of the things from a health and safety point of view, and one of the things that health and safety executive are quite fond of, is employee assistance programs. There's quite a lot of them out there. Here in Sheffield, you know, we have Westfield Health, we have Champion Health, and there are others out there who can provide employee assistance programs for your employees, a bit of a support mechanism. So if you do have employees that are struggling a little bit, then they have somewhere to turn, which is a confidential program for them, and they aren't expensive at all to have. So it might be worth just having a look around your area just to see any employee assistance providers who can give you that. So just want to touch a little bit really on the health and safety side. So if you could just next slide, please, that's brilliant. So, kind of feels I'm on the daily update of the government at 5 o'clock. Next slide, please. Health and Safety Executive. Obviously the guys, HSE, that govern the whole health and safety of workplaces. One thing I think you have to be aware of is that they are carrying out now an increasing number of spot checks of any business, whether you be low risk, medium risk, high risk. You might be in an office, you know, of just half a dozen people. You might kind of think, well, you know, we are fairly low risk. Well, you are from a health and safety point of view, but you still have the same responsibilities as everyone else. And I think probably one of the interesting things that I've kind of learned over the last couple of months and speaking to HSE and to clients that have policies and procedures in place is that you know, these sort of spot checks may kind of come to low risk businesses first of all, purely because, you know, there's more chance of maybe finding sort of breach of health and safety on a low risk business because you're kind of more relaxed about it perhaps a little bit than, say, for example, if you are an engineering company with, you know, 50 CNC machines and lathe and cutting machines. You know, these guys I'm sure will have quite strong and stringent health and safety policies in place already. So it's just making you aware that the Health and Safety Executive are monitoring this now, and they have what they call a fee for intervention charge. Now, fee for intervention charge is not a fine, it's just fee for intervention is the Health and Safety Executive charging you for their time. So if you find that you are a recipient of an inspection from HSE, they come into your workplace, they have a look around, they can't charge you for that, but what they can charge you for is if they then start to see any breaches of health and safety, no matter how minimal they may seem, then they will start to help you to put together action plans and so on, at which point they will start charging you. And as you can see on screen there, it's not cheap, it's £154 per hour. So the one thing you really want to do is to make sure you have health and safety policies and procedures in place, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. You may be very good at health and safety at the moment in your workplace. You may be one of those who, you know, if I came into a workplace and perhaps have asked to see health and safety documents, some people get sort of a dusty document off the shelf, blow the dust off, and there you go. So it doesn't matter where you are with your health and safety. Perhaps this might be just be a good time to readdress it, have a look at where you need to be. Give us the next slide on that one. RIDDOR, you've probably heard of RIDDOR, but not necessarily knowing what it means. But it's the reporting of infectious diseases, should I say, dangerous occurrence regulations. These are new guidelines that the government have brought in association with the Health and Safety Executive, purely based around COVID-19. So as Heather said, that you will get a copy of each slide. So I'm not going to run through them word for word, but there are 3 areas there that have been added to health and safety reporting. So if someone has actual exposure to coronavirus, which is unintended, so for example, if let's say you're office based and a client came into your office unaware to you that they have been diagnosed with COVID-19, really they should be self-isolating, but if they didn't know and they came into your office, that could be considered an unintended incident, and therefore you need to report that through RIDDOR reporting, through the Health and Safety Executive as a dangerous occurrence. If any of your employees have COVID-19 and the evidence there suggests that that was caused by some exposure in the workplace, then that's reported as a case of disease. And then, of course, finally, in the unfortunate event that there is a fatality with someone who has, again, exposure to coronavirus, then, as always, if there was a fatality in any workplace, you would need to report that through RIDDOR. How you would do that, it's quite simple. Health and Safety Executive website, and there is a RIDDOR reporting section on there, so that's where you would need to go. But in terms of your health and safety policies that you have at the moment, then you need to incorporate those guidelines because these are official guidelines from Move on to the next slide. So some measures for you to consider here. We were talking about this yesterday in our office around introducing temperature checks. So this is not mandatory. It's, well, at the moment it's not mandatory, but these things change week by week. Perhaps it may come into effect, but it's a good idea. It's good practice to, you know, randomly check temperatures when staff come into work. You don't need to do it every morning. And you don't need to do it for every staff, but on a sort of rotational basis, you could do it. But again, it's just showing good practice. It's for the employees that you have a duty of care to each and every one of them. So it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to try and perhaps, wherever possible, to put that into practice. Carrying out risk assessments. So hopefully you would all have a risk assessment anyway within your health and safety file that should be updated on a fairly regular basis. There are the measures that we've talked about already that now needs to be added, you know, to those risk assessments. And Catherine brought up a good point earlier around home working, that don't forget the people working at home as well. So it may well be that, you know, again, good practice, send them a risk assessment template for them to actually fill in themselves around, you know, display screen equipment and all the various things with home working, and just ask them to fill that in and send that back to you. You don't have to go to everybody's home address and carry out a risk assessment yourself, but it's quite easy for you to just email a template and get the staff our home working to fill that in. In terms of the office staff, of course, the social distancing aspect of making sure that, you know, the workstations, the desks are, you know, 2 meters apart, 6.5 feet away from each other, and fixing screens to workstations as well. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a landlord of a large club restaurant. At the moment, they were making pizzas as takeaways because they can't obviously open, and he had a difficulty in you know, putting screens and keeping people 2 meters apart in the kitchen. So we talked about it, talked it through, and he's now gone away and got sort of you know, plastic perspex screens to be able to put between sort of workstations, because they're delivering pizzas or making pizzas. He's, well, how they're supposed to pass the dough from one to another. Quite simply, they cut a rectangular sort of hole in them, and they're able to sort of pass it through. So there are ways around working these sort of things that you can work to your own sort of in the environment that you work in yourself. PPE, obviously at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around wearing masks and so on. There are no government guidelines as you know, you should be wearing masks within a workplace or an office scenario. Obviously, if you're travelling to and work on public transport, that's a different matter. But perhaps that might change over time. Again, new legislation is coming out all the time. Additional breaks for hand washing and providing hand washing and sanitisation stations is common sense, and organising perhaps a rota for staff, or when the staff come into your workplace on a morning, make them responsible to clean their own desks, chairs, you know, laptops, PCs, workstations. Don't rely on the office cleaner. If the office cleaners are still coming in there, don't rely on them having done that thoroughly. So just make sure that each member of staff perhaps are a little bit, have more responsibility in terms of making sure that their own workspace is as clean. Next slide. Jay mentioned earlier around the 8 specific guidelines for various sort of sectors. The government guidelines were published earlier on this month. The 32-page dossiers, they're quite sort of an intense, comprehensive guideline, which they need to be. You can go onto the HSE website, and they're all there. You can download them, you can read them, they're free to download for your specific sector. Maybe wise, I think, again, good practice to print off that 32-page dossier for your particular sector and have that in your workplace to hand. You don't essentially have to make everyone read it, sign to say they've read and understood it, but again, it might be something that you want to do in terms of best practice. Next slide. Stay COVID-19 secure. This is a poster that should now be displayed in your workplace. You all should really have a health and safety at work poster. Again, these are free to use. You can go onto the HSE website and download them, but make sure you do put them up there. But perhaps don't just sort of print them off and put them on your office wall. Maybe give staff a copy of them. You know, they're very basic. There's only half a dozen points on there, 5 points on there. But again, it's making sure that the information that you have, whether it's 19 or general risk assessment, that you don't just print them off and put them into a file. Share the information with your staff. So your COVID-19 poster that you can see on your screen there, please do download that from the HSE website. And I think there are smaller A5 versions, leaflet size versions that you can give to your employees. And the next slide. Just a little bit about the support that we might be able to provide. These are all sort of things and steps that we've just discussed there that you need to take. By all means, you know, you can go away and do them yourself. That's absolutely no problem at all. If you do need help with health and safety, first of all, then we can provide that for you. We can help you with documentation, audits, inspections, checklists, writing health and safety policies, ensuring that the COVID-19 implications are in place as well. We do that through our health and safety partner, Safety 2 Business. So if you want some information on that and how we can support you with that, as you can see there, my telephone number is on the bottom of the slide. By all means, give me a call. And any other health and safety related questions that you might have, my number's there for you to use, and you know, we're more than happy to help you as much as we can. And then the final slide on that, just flicking back to our employment law support. You may have a lot of questions that are fired at you, and hopefully we've tried to answer as much as we can in the short space of time we have with you today for employment law and health and safety. But certainly for our HR and employment law assistance, there's guidance there for you as well. It's only a small sort of short package which will hopefully help you every month. So again, if you need any more information on that, then please feel free to give me a call, and I'll hand you back to Heather.
All right, thank you very much, Jason. And full disclosure, we actually have used the services of Jay's office. They're absolutely wonderful, so I do highly recommend them. And they're not paying me for that. I just really think that you guys do a great job balancing not just the legal requirements, but also the realistic requirements of what dealing with employees means. And you have that philosophy not just in your office, but also in the way you help your clients. So I definitely recommend, if anyone has any questions, to get in touch. Believe it or not, you guys are very, very efficient in answering questions. So most of the questions that were asked of our attendees during the course of this have already been answered. In fact, some of them were answered as they were being typed out, I think, which is wonderful. But we do have a couple of them. The first one is actually for Catherine. And okay. I'm wondering, this one person has asked, if we have a work at home policy in place, are we financially responsible for ensuring that every employee has the technology they need? For example, if they need a different laptop from the one that they use at home, or if they need upgraded Wi-Fi because they don't have very quick Wi-Fi at home, and a lot of people are using it. So how would you respond to that?
I think in terms of the equipment, if they need a laptop or a phone in order to be able to work from home, then yes, you are responsible providing that. In terms of Wi-Fi, there's not really a definitive answer on that. But what we tend to be saying is, well, first of all, an employee can now claim back directly from the HMRC themselves for those expenses. I don't think it's a great deal. I think it's, I may be wrong, but it's around about £6 a week, I think, something like that. But also what we're saying is, you only really need to pay anything that they're out of pocket. And what you need to take into account is that a lot of the employees who are working from home are saving an enormous amount on both petrol and parking. So in reality, they're probably not out of pocket. They are probably quids in. And so you need to weigh that up. So in answer to that, there's no definitive answer, but I would take each one on their own merits. When it comes to not just the technology, but sort of the workspace, you need to take a reasonable view on that. You have a responsibility from a health and safety point of view to make sure they have a safe working environment, but you also need to consider what is reasonable. If you've got somebody that you know is only going to be working from home for 3 weeks and they ask you to fork out for £1,000 standing desk and a £500 orthopedic chair, then probably that's not going to be reasonable. But if they're working from home for a bit of a longer period of time and they ask for a laptop stand or an ergonomic keyboard in order to help them, then probably it is reasonable. So each case needs to be taken on its own merit, and you need to weigh up the needs of your employee alongside the situation. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. If not, the person, feel free to ask a follow-up and clarifying question, and if we can't cover it before we finish, we will try and get back to them. On that note, I was actually going to ask Jay a bit of a more general question, but with a specific bent. A lot of this was because a lot of your clients are employers, but I know you also represent employees. What would you say are the best resources for employees to go to if they are having an issue, if they have a question? One that comes up for me in my experience a lot, just interacting with my clients and with just people I know, is the issue of being asked to work whilst on furlough. And sometimes the justification being, well, they're only having me work 20% or just a little bit, and since they're only being paid 80%, is that okay, kind of thing. So how do I find the answer to that? Jay, we're just going to ask you to turn your microphone back on.
Okay, have you got me there?
There we go.
So yeah, well, it's interesting. I've seen something called furlough fraud adverts that the HMRC are putting out. So I don't know whether there's a helpline associated with that, but I assume there is. And I think that employers need to be careful because employees are being actively encouraged to report situations where employers are asking them to work when they're on furlough and they shouldn't be. And we've already seen, there is some room for abuse here, and I think it is happening. They can always take advice from an employment solicitor like me. I suppose the consequence of doing of working, for example, when they're on furlough, if they were to report that to their employer and they were suffered a detriment or were dismissed, then that could be classed as a whistleblowing under the Public Interest Disclosure Act, and possibly constructive dismissal. So claims, I think, will definitely arise from those sorts of things. But I suppose on a more practical level, it's about communication. So employers are doing things in a real hurry, and employees need to also appreciate that they're trying to save their businesses. So having some communication and saying, well, do you realise I'm not supposed to be doing this? I don't want to get the business or myself into any difficulties, and therefore I'm pointing that out to you.
Excellent, thank you. That is a big help. And I know that both employers and employees are feeling still uncertain. You've had a lot of questions like last week about what do we do with, can we negotiate with our employer about going on furlough, that they won't make me redundant. And it's a balance really is what we're finding, I think. And I really, really appreciate all of you taking the time this week to come back, Jay, and for the other two joining us. That was a lot of really helpful information. What I'm going to ask now of the attendees is for you to think about what types of issues we can help you with at Answer and Evaluate, because that's what Answer and Evaluate does. It goes to businesses, law firms, retailers, online businesses, down to industries in the like we're in the Sheffield Barnsley area, we have people who work in the forges. So from high tech to low tech to highly professional to the highly technical or highly skilled working place. And we want to know what types of things you need to hear from us, what types of tools you would like. We are going to next week, I'm really excited about this, have a cybersecurity scam protection webinar, and Laura Spencer, who does some training for us on that, and she's very popular with her phishing and email scam training, will be joined by Jennifer Williams, who is the head of IT for Lawyer Checker. And they'll be talking about the common cyber threats that are out there and how to respond to them, both from an individual non-tech way and also from a technical standpoint. So we're really looking forward to that. Laura is also an apprentice solicitor with Digital Law UK, so she's very much in touch with a lot of the new things that are coming out on that. So we're looking forward to it. If you want to get in touch, we are available on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook. And if you'd like to be made aware of upcoming events, you can always email us at events@Anson Evaluate, and we will add you to our newsletter. And when we close this all up, we will have a recording available. So if you think that anything you heard here would be of interest to anyone else, please feel free to get the link. It will also be on our social media pages, and you can send that, and it'll be ready on demand, usually by Monday, if not by the end of the day. Okay, and there's a survey afterwards also. Very helpful for us to know how things went. So thank you again to my wonderful panel, and I thank you very, very much for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy time to do this for us. And thank you all who attended for taking that time as well. Have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.